Welcome to Module 4, How to Implement or Re-energize a P3O. On the next slide, we shall see the syllabus areas that we're going to cover as a part of this particular module. What we would be covering in this particular module would include the key activities in the implementation lifecycle for a permanent P3O and their sequence. In other words, what are the various phases and what are the various activities that we would need to undertake to implement a permanent P3O is what we're going to look into. And the second component under level 1 syllabus is to understand the 4 sections of a typical P3O blueprint. In other words, when we create a target operating model or a blueprint for a P3O model, what are the key components? What are the 4 key components that we need to look into when we create a blueprint document is what we're going to look into. And as a part of level 2 learning, we would look into the need to use a defined process to implement the P3O, typically based on MSP principles. If you recollect, in one of the earlier modules, we looked into using a program approach to implement P3O, and MSP is an Axelos product for program management. We would look into the key activities and outputs of the various phases and processes within the implementation lifecycle. We would look into those activities and outputs of the identification process, of the defined process, and we would look into the use and typical contents of a P3O blueprint. And we would examine what documents are created at portfolio, program, and project level or by transition management, and the typical information flows between the P3O model and senior management and the wider organization. And a few more syllabus areas that we're going to look into would be along the lines of the key sources of threats to achieve the blueprint. We would examine the key activities and outputs of the delivery and close processes. And we would look into various aspects of the implementation lifecycle for a temporary office or project office. Now, you might wonder that there are 3 different syllabus codes, but the same topic, but there would be different aspects of the same topic that we would cover in these 3 different syllabus areas. So let's start off with an understanding of the big picture of the implementation lifecycle for a permanent P3O. So on this particular slide, we have a big picture understanding of the implementation lifecycle. Now, when you kind of look up on the top, you have 4 phases. Phase 1 is the identification phase. Phase 2 is the definition phase. Phase 3 is when we deliver capabilities and realize benefits. Now, it's not necessary that the delivery of the capability is done in one single tranche. You could kind of do that in multiple tranches. For the sake of simplicity, we put this as one single phase over here. And finally, you have the close phase. Now, the trigger for any P3O implementation is a mandate. A mandate is a direction that comes from the senior management that we need to set up a P3O. So what exactly is that embryonic business case? What exactly is that mandate? Is something that is outside the scope of this particular guidance, but that comes in as an input to the implementation process. Now, the first step or the first phase in the implementation lifecycle is the identification stage. Now, as a part of identification, what we do is we do a current state assessment. In other words, where do we stand as of today in terms of our current P3O capabilities? And what is the vision that we are trying to achieve? What are the investment objectives? What is it that we are trying to achieve? What are the goals? And we might want to create a business case at a pretty high level. Please keep in mind that this is not a detailed business case. It is more an indicative one. It is a high-level business case in terms of high-level requirements, high-level costing, high-level risks, and a business justification as to why we should move on to the next phase. So those are the key components of the identification phase. And one of the key outputs that we create as a part of the identification phase is a document called a project brief. A brief is a document that goes to the members of the project board or the program board. They would examine the brief and they would give us a go-ahead to move on to the second phase, which is the define phase. Now, what is it that we do as a part of the define phase? We've got a few activities over here. This is where we establish the project or the program team. We would make sure that we create our stakeholder register and stakeholder matrix in terms of understanding who are the key stakeholders, who are the powerful ones, who are the interested stakeholders, how should we communicate with them. A bit of stakeholder planning is a key component over here. And then if you remember, we have started our journey in creating an outline vision statement in the identification phase, but then over here in the define phase, we are expounding it, we are making it into a more detailed vision statement. And this is where we create the blueprint document. In other words, in the preceding phase, we know what the current state is, but then as a part of the definition phase, we are documenting our future state. What would be the capabilities be like in the future state? We create our benefits related documents in terms of our benefits maps, and we finalize the business case over here. If you remember, in the preceding phase, as a part of identification, we have created an outline business case, but over here, we create a detailed business case. We have a better understanding of the costs, a better understanding of benefits, a better understanding of risk, and therefore we could create a very detailed business plan. And ultimately, one of the key documents is the program definition plan. So we take that plan and we take it to the members of the board, and the members of the board would look into the definition plan and they would sign off on the delivery of the program. And that is when we move on to the delivery phase. So this is where we are implementing several projects. The outputs of the projects would give us new capabilities, and over a period of time, we could realize those benefits and constantly review them across the delivery phases. And then there would come a point in the life cycle of the project or the program wherein we would like to formally close because we are done with the objectives of the project or the program, and that would bring a close to the program. Now, that is an understanding of the implementation life cycle at a very high level. Now, let's kind of do a bit of deep dive. Let's move on into some detailed understanding of what is the work that happens in each of these phases. Let's start off with the first phase, identification phase. So on the next slide, we have a few ideas pertaining to the identification phase. Now, in the identification phase, we would examine what problems we are trying to solve. What business drivers do you need to achieve? You know, when defining the issues and problems that senior managers rate as critical, they need to be asked their views and consensus gained across a group of senior managers, preferably the main board. So it's good to kind of have a problem identification workshop with senior managers to make sure that there is a consensus and what problems that we are trying to address. This ensures that the P3O team understands what success looks like across the organization from different viewpoints and allows them to gain consensus on a common P3O vision. Gathering these views and gaining consensus may take the form of a series of structured interviews or workshops. It's good to kind of bring in an experienced facilitator who could do a bit of visioning workshops with the senior management, because a vision is an important component of driving the entire implementation process. And the second question that we might want to ask is, what P3O provision exists currently? You know, very few best-in-class P3O models appear overnight in a greenfield site. An organization often has existing program and project offices carrying out some, if not all, of the services required by the ideal model. Therefore, in order to create a vision of what the P3O model should be providing, We need to understand what is offered now and how effective it is. In other words, when we look into the larger landscape of organizations, no organization is a greenfield site. In other words, we don't normally implement things from the scratch. There would be some capability, some maturity on the project and program front. So that is a good starting point. What does exist currently is a good way to assess our current state. And that would kind of help us baseline where we are today. And when we define the implementation phase, we might want to think about the future state. So understanding where we are would help us baseline our current capabilities. The third question, what will be the scope of the officer model? Some of the associated questions would be, who will be its customers? What outcomes or added value are we expecting? How will we measure its success? What are the key services? What are our priorities? We could use a Moscow technique. By the way, Moscow is an acronym that stands for what are the must-have requirements, what are the should-have requirements, what are the could-have requirements, and what are the won't-have requirements. It's good to kind of prioritize our requirements in terms of what capabilities would we like to have in tranche 1 and what capabilities would we like to have in tranche 2, tranche 3. So good to kind of define those priorities as a part of the identification phase. A few more thoughts as a part of identification.